But the positive of it all, Greg, is that what I thought was, why am I racing? If this, like, is this really what I want to do with my life? Is this allowing me to achieve the highest purpose I have? And after Chris died, his name was Chris as well, Chris Strader. I thought, I got to live for two people now. I can't, I can't waste a day of my life.
Any of my brothers that are out there, struggling with their deployment or, life in general, I tell them that, hey, to stay strong and to keep holding on and to understand, you're here for a reason and that, your life and what you're doing does have purpose.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome everyone to another edition of Guards Down. Today I have with me Chris Larsen. How's it going this morning?
I'm doing great, Greg. Thanks for having me on today.
Good. Chris is from Asheville, North Carolina.
Absolutely. Yep. Right down the road from where you grew up, I understand.
Yep. And you're also into real estate investing. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. I think that's how we connected, through a mutual friend, Jerome.
Correct. So tell us a little more about yourself before we get started.
Yeah, Greg, appreciate the opportunity. So I grew up in Maryland. I started racing bicycles when I was 14. That kind of defined my life to a large degree. I did that all the way into college, and we'll probably dive into that a little bit deeper, kind of my transition out of cycling as during what I call my first retirement from cycling. I started racing again, doing age-graded stuff when I was about 30 years old. So I raced on and off for about 20 years, and then had two wonderful boys when I was 31 years old, and then another one 2 years later, and decided that racing really wasn't worth the time away from my family. But you mentioned being into real estate. I bought my first piece of property when I was 21 years old, and I'm 41 now. So over the last 20 years, it's evolved from a small single-family portfolio to a large portfolio of multifamily properties, and we have about 1,200 doors now. My partners and I under management. So it's been a fun journey, but there's been some bumps along the way that fortunately I've gotten to learn from, and I feel have helped me move in positive directions ultimately over the years.
I got you, man. To get into cycling, did you win any races, or were
yeah?
they
So.
all...
I don't know how familiar you are, or audience is with cycling, but as an amateur sport, you start out as a Cat 5, and then as you race, you move up. As you win races or do more races, you get points. So you move up from a Category 5 to a 4 to a 3, and a lot of people get to a 3 that are racing, but it's really hard to push past that, because once you're a Category 2, you get to start racing with the pros in some local races. Once you're a Category 1, you're essentially a professional. You just don't have a license. So a Category 1 amateur is really at the same level as a professional. And once you're at a Category 1, you're able to take out a professional license. So I raced as a Category 1 on the road, in cyclocross, also on mountain bikes. And I won several state championships. I've won one on the road. I've won in cyclocross. I've won on mountain bike. I haven't actually counted all my victories over the years, but there's been some that have been more special than others. I think probably one of the things I'm most proud of is I was All-American in college. I was top 5 in the country.
Oh wow!
That's kind of when I hit my peak. Before I like I said, I retired the first time when I was about 20 years old.
So it sounds like cycling has been a big part of your life. So when we jump into it, our topic is how do we deal with trauma and grief, right, that we endure in life. So one of the first questions I always like to ask my guests is, do you feel like you were taught or equipped to cope with and deal with PTSD and grief, growing up as a child?
Absolutely not. I know we talked a little bit before the show. My father passed away when I was 5 years old. I just turned 5. It was in July of would have been 1983. And I turned 5 in June, just a month before. He passed away in a plane crash. So there was no warning. It was very abrupt, and a lot of my memories were, of the kind of turmoil that surrounded our daily life with my mom as she processed that. So for a young child, it was easier for me because I was raised in a Christian family, and the way I dealt with it was, that's what my mom told me. She said, "Well, Mom, Dad's going to be okay because he's with Jesus now." So when I was 5 years old, that's what I had, was religion to help get me through that period. I think it was a lot more complicated for my mom. And as I got older and I kind of understood more and thought back through it, a lot of those experiences that I had with her were an after effect of the loss of her husband and father to her two children.
Got you. I've spoken with another guest before, and he lost his father as well at an early age, and he basically had to be a self-made man because his mother, she was an immigrant,
Oh,
right?
wow.
And so he didn't have the family and support system, like you would have with church and other family members around. So
Yeah.
can you speak more to your support and what type of love, encouragement, guidance you got?
Yeah, absolutely. And if people want to learn more about me or what I do, I also have a book that came out a couple months ago. It's called Next Level Income, and people can go to our website, nextlevelincome.com, click on book, and you can get a free ebook. We'll also send you a free copy as well if you put your address in. So if anybody's interested in anything more about what we talk about today. But yeah, my father, passed away at 5. I look back through my life, and it's interesting because I had 3 big losses in my life. And one was my father, age 5. One was my best friend when I was 19. One was my mother then, passed away at the end of 2011, right before my second son was born. And at that point, I was 33 years old. So I had kind of different systems and different support as I grew up. When I was 5, there just wasn't really anything there. I feel like it really wasn't really talked about. I would never say I'm totally self-made. I was very fortunate. My mother remarried my stepfather when I was 11 years old, and he was there for me for a big portion of my childhood. My parents, I think my mother in particular, was very good at teaching me certain principles. And again, our Christian upbringing was really good with that. We were in church 3 days a week. So having that and having that support and that faith was very important during that time. I think it was very important for my mother as well as she went through that period. But I remember, when I was younger, it was tough, when your father's not around to share certain things with and do those things. My mother did a pretty good job of stepping in, to that role as best she could. And again, my stepfather was great to kind of step up. To touch on the self-made part, what I would tell you is it made me more independent, Greg, because my stepfather's a lot different than I am. And we didn't have a lot of financial resources when I was younger. So racing bicycles, it's not a real mainstream sport. My stepfather, he played football like you did. He was captain of his college football team. So for his son to be a cyclist, shaving his legs at age 14, being 135, skinny pounds at almost 6 feet tall, it was a little different than playing football. But what was great is we ended up starting to ride together, and it really helped us strengthen and build our relationship with respect to that. So as I got older, cycling became something that gave me confidence. It gave me the relationships, gave me, the support group as I got older.
Got you. That's awesome, man. That's awesome that your stepfather, stepped in like that and supported,
Yeah.
Your dreams and what you wanted. And so it sounds like racing bikes became your outlet, right, for how you dealt with a lot of the trauma and the grief or experiences that you went through.
It was a good bridge for me. I mean, I look back and, I'll never forget one of my middle school teachers. She said, I would never go back to middle school. That was like the worst years of my childhood. And I'm like, really? So I was in the band. I played instruments from a young age. My mother was a musician. She went to a conservatory and was a music teacher as well. So she played piano, which was great because she'd play in church. So I was a musician, but I never really felt like I fit into kind of groups. I mean, I like math, so I probably have a talent for numbers, and I really enjoy financial analysis, and almost got a PhD in finance. I got a master's degree, got an MBA in finance, almost did a PhD. I enjoyed it so much. But when I found cycling, it was something that it gave me two things. One, it gave me freedom because I could ride my bike really wherever I wanted to. I mean, and then ultimately when I was traveling for cycling, I mean, when I was 16, I was driving up and down the East Coast. I was flying across the country, sometimes by myself at age 17, to go to races all across the country. And it gave me a confidence because when you're 14 years old and you're a skinny kid and you really don't know where you fit in school. I was a pretty good baseball player, but never the best. And when I found cycling, it was like, wow, this is something I'm good at. I won my first state championship at age 15, and I started to really believe in myself and have a lot of confidence. And that confidence really gave me a lot of strength, in different relationships that I had, as well as when I got into college. It gave me that bedrock, and that really brought to me the second big point in my life when I lost my best friend. He was 18 years old. I had just turned 19. It was at the end of June. It was June 21st, first day of summer, and it would have been 1997, right in between my freshman and sophomore year in college. And for me, it was way harder than losing my father. When you're that young, you're very malleable. You can adapt to new things. And like I said, yeah, you don't have a real strong sense of how the world is when you're 19 and you lose somebody who's like a brother to you, who's your best friend. And, he was my friend for 5 years during high school, which is, as you know, some of the most formative years of our lives. I mean, I still am, shaking just thinking about it. My palms are sweating. I mean, it was absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
Absolutely
So
devastating.
I mean, for you to, come into yourself, and I mean, you're absolutely right. So at a young age, you aren't really aware, you're taught, okay, this is now the life that you're going to live. You don't really know like the effects of, what taking place. And so at 19, having an understanding of the world and you're finding out who you are. And at that stage, you get to pick your social circle, your support group, who you're around.
Yeah.
And so to lose your best friend, at that stage in life, yeah, I know that must have been very hard. The transition, what did it do to you or for you when it came to, to losing him? Like,
Yeah, there's positives and negatives, and it sounds weird to say that because you think, well, how could losing somebody be a positive? But you look back, and I think that the most challenging points of our life, they define us. They allow us to either fall down and stay down, or they allow us to get up and get stronger. Every time you get up off the ground, I had a wrestling coach. I'd wrestled for a very short period in high school when I was just starting to race bicycles. So I kind of stepped away from that. But the coach, he wouldn't let you help each other up. He said, when you get up, you get stronger. Always get up yourself. And I feel like it's the same thing in life. When you get knocked down, you got to get back up. And if the more you get knocked down, the stronger you get, the more you're capable to deal with those things. So for me, it was absolutely devastating to lose my best friend. I mean, I was kind of like aimless because I talked to him every day. I trained with him every day. He was going to be my roommate, 2 months later in college. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with myself. I didn't want to be an engineer. I was in school for engineering. I got back to school and my grades plummeted. I tried to figure out like what I was going to do. I figured I'd just get through school and become a professional cyclist. But ultimately, after a year of putting my head down and just riding my bike, I was winning a ton of races, but the victories were hollow. They were empty. And I'll never forget the day I quit. And the day I quit was about a week after I won my best friend's memorial race. It was like Labor Day, September, the year after he passed away. And I was flying. I mean, I got a flat tire. I got spit out of the back of the group. I came back through, went through the group and won. And I put my hands up and I felt nothing, like nothing, zero, nothing inside. So to work for, at that point, 6 or 7 years of your life and get to the pinnacle and have no feeling was really strange to me. So a week later, I'm in the state championship and we were in a group that was chasing the front group. It was off the front again, with a chance to win. And I just something clicked in me and I just didn't want to race. I pulled over. My mother was there. I pulled over and they call it the feed zone. And my mother looked at me. She's like, "What are you doing?" I said, I'm done." And she looked at me. She goes, "I've never seen you quit a race before." And she didn't know it at the time, but when I told her I was done, I was done. Like I quit racing right then and there in my mind. So for me, losing my friend, it left me very confused, out of direction, kind of in that life. And then ultimately it led me away from the sport that I loved. But the positive of it all, Greg, is that what I thought was, why am I racing? If this, is this really what I want to do with my life? Is this allowing me to achieve the highest purpose I have? And after Chris died, his name was Chris as well, Chris Strader, I thought, I got to live for two people now. I can't waste a day of my life. And I thought that riding my bike maybe wasn't what I really was supposed to be doing at that time in my life. So I pledged to do two things. I pledged that I would honor the loss of Chris by living my life to a level that was so full that it filled up what would have been his life and my life. And then two, I pledged never to let an opportunity pass me by again. So if somebody said, "Hey, do you want to go raft down the Grand Canyon?" I'd say, "Heck yeah, let's do that." And I wouldn't let some amazing opportunity pass me by. And then, things like asking my wife out on our first date. I thought, what, if I ever see this woman again, I'm going to ask her out. And I did. So I've taken some chances in my life. I've grabbed some things, and I think it's, I get up every day and I've had this, I had this feeling, and I don't know if people are watching the video, like life is pulling me by the shirt, like pulling me forward. And that's the feeling I get every morning when I get out of bed. And if I don't get up, or if I'm sleeping in, you can imagine if you're trying to lay down and relax and somebody's pulling at your shirt, it's kind of a strange feeling at times, but it's something that I know I'm not feeling very well if I don't have that pull. And then there are times when I feel exhausted, and I still like to ride my bike. And I love that feeling when you've worked really hard, when you feel like you squeezed everything out of a day, because I can lay down at the end of the day and feel like I've done everything that I can, and I've honored my friend and honored the gift that I've been given every day that I get to wake up.
Hey guys, it's Jerome. Greg and I wanted to invite you to the community that we created for the whole Guards Down family. Jump on Facebook or check the show notes for the Guards Down Facebook group. There you'll be able to find a community of folks who are committed to raising awareness about complex grief and PTSD. Look forward to chatting with you guys in the group. Now let's get back to the episode.
Gotcha. Okay. So to go back, right, because you talked about basically the turning point in your life where you wanted to make a change, right? And so leading up to that, you had been feeling empty, even though you accomplished and stayed, engaged in so many different activities, right? And so to go from winning a race and, being a champion and not feeling anything to, to waking up now. And I mean, every time we talk, you got this great big smile, to feel and love life, right? Tell us about how you had to overcome some of those issues and relearn some good behaviors, so that you could actually enjoy. Because I mean, I know you were on these races, and when you're out there, it's just you and your thoughts, right?
Yeah, and it's I've had some really interesting times in my life where I've been riding my bike, and when you go ride for 4 hours and you're just thinking the whole time, it can be a challenge if you're just in your own head and you have some of these challenging thoughts. I've always been a man of action, so you said when you relearn it, like as an engineer, you're taught to solve a problem by first starting with the assumptions. And when you go through life and something is ripped out of your life, it's like one of those assumptions is proved false. And you've been solving this problem, and then somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, "Hey, this assumption's not right." And what happens is you feel like all the work you've done up to that point is been a waste. And that's kind of how I felt. You feel like, man, I've been spending my life doing this, and this isn't the right path. So it took me a while. And one of the things that suffered, I think, were my personal relationships, my romantic relationships. I haven't really talked about this very much, but my wife and I, we dated for 5 years before we got married, and I almost effed that up. And I think the reason was I was afraid. I was afraid of experiencing that feeling again. So I was messing this relationship up. Unfortunately, I didn't do anything that totally destroyed it. But we were dating. She'd moved in with me. We both moved to Northern Virginia. And I wasn't happy, Greg. And it was like I was looking for something. It was like I was trying to find a problem so I could get out of this relationship. And I was talking to a professional friend, a friend I worked with, and she said, you should talk to a professional about this. And I started every week or every other week seeing a therapist and talking about like what was going on, talking about my father, talking about the loss of my friend. I actually lost another friend in college too. My freshman year, he was hiking for his birthday. It was his 30th birthday, and he slid down the side of a trail he was on, and I think he was in Colorado, and broke his ankle, and they never found him. And he was a pretty good friend. So I had a couple big losses in a very short period of time in college, and what I realized was I was not letting people in, and I was actually sabotaging, some relationships. So it took me about 6 months of pretty intensive work to realize that what I was doing was I was really focusing on the negative to avoid that potential pain that I was going to face again. And what I had to do was I had to learn to do something very simple. I had to shift my focus from the problem to being grateful to what was going on in my life and what was working in my life, and accept that I had this wonderful person in this wonderful relationship. And Greg, it was like a switch went off. I'm like shaking thinking about it, but just that one mind shift of going from what's wrong, what can I solve, what's wrong, to being grateful for what I had, totally changed. And within less than a month, we were engaged, and we've had a phenomenal relationship, phenomenal partnership. We actually just celebrated 19 years of being together.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So it's not our 19-year wedding anniversary, but we started dating over 19 years ago now. And you can probably see some pictures in the background here of our beautiful boys and the family we have. And I wake up every day now. And so that's how I start my day. That's the tool I use. Is I meditate every morning, and then I think about what I'm grateful for. And it's very simple. I just think of 3 things that I'm grateful for. Yeah. And even in the toughest times, I find that there's always something that I can be grateful for. And it may not put me in the perfect mindset, but it gets me moving back in that right direction.
No, I like that. Can we talk about going back to your therapist and the treatment? So One of the things that, I definitely believe in, because, I being in the military, I of course had PTSD, and I had grief as well. I had some really close friends that I lost. And so it took a while for me to like process all that. And so one of the things with this is what I'm trying to help spread or share the light on is, getting help and letting people know that it's okay and it's perfectly normal, to get help. Other parts to it is cultural sensitive therapy, right? So if your therapist looks like you or has been through some of the same experiences you've been through, then that connection can be a lot deeper, which will help make the treatment a lot more effective. So can you speak more to, your therapist, your selection process, and the actual treatments that you went through to get through this?
So I really appreciate what you just said. I think, and maybe people may disagree, but I think as a man in this society, we have this machismo, right? Like, you're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to be, a man, and it's different from different cultures too. And it may be better, it may be worse, but as a man, it's like, it's weak, right? Like you're weak if you have these emotions or feel this. Like you're supposed to just get on with your life and do things. And I think as an athlete too, I was not in the military, but my father was in the Navy. My grandfather was in the Navy, uncle, cousins as well. And when I was with Medtronic, I trained device reps, new reps that were coming out, and a lot of them had military backgrounds. I have a tremendous appreciation and respect for that. But same thing, we're taught to, you just kind of move forward, you plow forward, you don't question it. As an athlete, you feel pain, you feel an injury. The story with Lance Armstrong, forget the drugs part, but when he talked about testicular cancer, he wasn't diagnosed early because he ignored the pain. And, as men, we ignore or push that pain away. And I did the same thing. For me, I was fortunate that I had a coworker, and she was female, but we had a pretty close relationship because we talk every day through work, and she worked with therapists, with us psychiatrists and psychological therapists. So, when she said, "Hey, I have this therapist I think would be a good fit for you," that was somebody that I trusted. And I was young. I was probably 25, maybe 26 at the time. Now I'd look a little bit deeper and say, okay, who, like you said, it's kind of like a coach. I want to work with a coach or a mentor that has been through the challenges that I'm dealing with and has exhibited success in those areas. So if I were to go back and do it again, I would say, okay, who is this person? Have they dealt with these things? I'd probably interview a few different ones, but I trusted my professional colleague, and I was fortunate that it was a good fit for me with respect to that.
Good. And so what kind of treatment options did you go through? And the only reason I'm asking is, because there's so many different ones out there, and, some are better than others for, different people, just depending on the situation.
It's interesting. I was a pharmaceutical rep, and I spent 15 years in the medical device field. I know a lot of doctors, but I'm pretty, I wouldn't say anti-drugs, but I always try to find if there's a natural way to deal with things, or something that I can, focus on first. I credit that largely to my grandparents. My grandfather, he was really big into kind of natural remedies and supplements and those sorts of things. So I think right now when I'm not in a good headspace, and even back then, the first thing I do is I focus on, what I can control. And I think the challenge is, a lot of people, they turn to, and I do too. Like, I'll admit it. Like, I had a tough day. Maybe I'll pour myself a drink, have a cocktail or a glass of wine. And it just, it's like, I just kind of get out of that space. When I'm going through really challenging times, what I do is I focus on exercise and diet, and I try to get the right amount. And we had a great interview on our podcast, Next Level Income Show, with Craig Ballantyne. And Craig talks about, how to have the perfect day. And one thing that he talks about, and I don't know if it's in the episode or not, but it's one thing that he says is you have to get the right amount of exercise. So for a lot of years, I was exercising too much, Greg, to the detriment of my physical health, but it helped me mentally because I was so tired. It allowed me to kind of not feel that pain. Yeah. I could go and do that. Or what I would do is I would train really hard and think about like who I was going to beat. So I'd get into this negative mental space, and I would take out my anger and my pain on my competition. So it was a good way. Like, I would say that was a good thing. It helped me get better in one sense, but ultimately from a mental perspective, it wasn't good. So from a substance perspective, I never took any antidepressants. I just focused heavily on what I could do from a exercise and diet perspective. I've certainly explored those options. That's just not something that I've done myself, and I focused largely on, what I could do at a personal level. And then
Gotcha.
I focused heavily on the conversation part.
Okay. So I know you mentioned, speaking with a therapist, you also talked about dieting as well as exercise and meditating, like you were saying early in the mornings. With everything that you know and have learned about dealing with and coping with PTSD or trauma and grief, what would you tell your younger self? What lessons or what tool sets would you pass on to your kids so that, they could learn how to deal with, trauma and grief when they get older?
Yeah, I think the big thing is, number one, talk to somebody. and don't be afraid to reach out to somebody. I was fortunate. A good friend of mine, John Hamlin, that I raced with, he stayed with me after my best friend died, and we literally rode together every day for like a month. And he was just there, and it allowed me to maintain a routine. And that'd be the second thing. But number one, talk to somebody that you trust, and then find somebody that's a professional to talk to, because what you're going through, a lot of people have gone through it, and there are people that have experienced what you're dealing with, and it's okay to have those feelings, but it's not okay to deal with those all by yourself. It's not going to help you in the long run. And then the second thing I would say is maintain a routine. So like we're going through the COVID-19 crisis, I think one of the big things, it's good to get up at the same time, find a way to work out, even if you can't go to the gym. If you've experienced a loss, try to maintain a routine, because your body will adapt to that. If you start, sleeping 10, 12 hours a day, drinking too much, sleeping in, drinking a lot of coffee, what happens is your mental state starts to deteriorate, and it starts to it's a snowball effect. So I'd say don't be embarrassed to talk to somebody, get help, from a professional. And two, try to maintain a routine that is healthy and that resembles what you were doing before.
That's awesome. Okay. Well, with closing, so I definitely want to check out The Perfect Day. You said with Craig Valentine, that's on your show, right?
Yeah, and I think he gives the book away free. So if you go into the show notes, that was one of our first shows. Actually, it was our first show. So if you go to the website and click on podcast, nextlevelincome.com podcast, he's got a free book giveaway on there.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, look, we're going to wrap this up. Is there any last words of encouragement you want to tell, someone out there that either is going through what you've been through or might?
Yeah. I mean, as tough as it is, I wish somebody, when I was going through that period, reached out and said, listen, it's going to be okay. I know it doesn't feel like that right now, but, find somebody that you trust. And the other thing is, if you know somebody that's gone through something like this or is going through a tough period, reach out to that person, spend time with them, tell them that they can reach out and call you. I have a good friend. He lost his wife, and he's got a couple young children. And I call him and I say, hey, how you doing? Do you want to talk about it? And you can tell people sometimes don't want to talk about it, but one, reach out to somebody, and then two, if you know somebody that's going through that, reach out to them and tell them that you're there for them, because I can't tell you how much it meant to me when those people reached out to me. And don't say are you okay? Is something, wrong? Just be a friend and spend time with that person, and they'll open up to you when the time is right. So I really love what you're doing, Greg. It's there's some things I talked about today I haven't talked about in public or even talked about in a long time. But I hope that this reaches some people and helps them out. And I really appreciate what you're doing.
Chris, I really appreciate you, man. I thank you so much for sharing your story, and some of the most vulnerable moments, of your life with us. So, man, I mean, thank you. And
thank you,
I
Greg.
hope you and your family, y'all are staying safe out there. And man, I definitely look forward to talking with you again.
Likewise, Greg. Thank you so much for having me on today.
All right. Well, everyone, this is Greg and Chris signing off with Guards Down. So y'all stay safe, stay focused, and stay engaged out there.
That's what it's really all about. Giving yourself a fighting chance to just show what you got.